Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to The Claverings by Anthony Trollope. We are reading through this novel. I'm reading it aloud to you with copious interruptions. And we have been dealing recently with the trials of poor Julia Brabazon, Julia Lady Ongar, who not only has to deal with the growing plot, the plot down at Clavering to affiance her to Archie Clavering, useless sot of a man, but also with her true feelings for Harry Clavering. They were once lovers in the long ago misty days of their youth. They're both still very young. They're just morons. And he has recently pledged his love to her, even though she knows perfectly well that he's engaged to another woman. And in the fuss and the back and forth of those people pulling at her attention, we may have lost sight of the fact that there is another person who very much wants her attention. Count Pateroff, the brother of Sophie Gordeloup, who the odious little Franco-Prussian woman, a Franco-French woman who was always with Julia. She's always with Julia, even though Julia doesn't really like her company, even though she's a Russian spy, and a seedy one at that. Thoroughly untrustworthy, thoroughly grasping. Count Pateroff wants to see Julia Ongar. He has let her know, he has tried to reach her and failed, but he has let her know that he wants to see her on a matter of the late Lord Ongar's papers. Julia has told Harry Clavering that this absolutely cannot be true. All of Lord Ongar's papers were boxed up in front of her and sent to his lawyers. There's no reason for Count Pateroff to want to talk to her about anything connected with Lord Ongar or his estate. And it doesn't matter anyway. She doesn't want to see him. His name was linked with hers when it came to scandal. He's the last person she should be seeing, and since it's the one tiny vestige of common sense that she's exhibiting, I don't think we should begrudge it to her. But in this chapter that we're reading today, Count Pateroff sees her. He has already told Harry Clavering has taken a message from Julia to Count Pateroff saying, "She cannot know you socially. Please stop trying to meet her. She doesn't want to talk to you." And Count told Harry to his face, "I don't like people interfering with me. I intend to disregard these instructions. I will see her, and she will see me." And now we're going to see to what extent he's willing to take that. This is chapter 27, and it's called Freshwater Gate. Count Pateroff, Sophie's brother, was a man who, when he had taken a thing in hand, generally liked to carry it through. It may perhaps be said that most men are of this turn of mind, but the Count was, I think, especially eager in this respect. And as he was not one who had many irons in the fire, who made either many little efforts or any great efforts after things altogether beyond his reach, he was justified in expecting success. As to Archie's courtship, anyone who really knew the man and the woman who knew anything of the nature of women in general would have predicted failure for him. Even with Doodle's aid, he could not have a chance in the race. So there's a race going on. There's a wealthy widow. Of course, there's a race. But when Count Pateroff entered himself for the same prize, those who knew him would not speak of his failure as a thing certain. The prize was too great not to be attempted by so very prudent a gentleman. He was less impulsive in his nature than his sister, and did not open his eyes and talk with watering mouth of the 7,000 pounds a year. But in his quiet way he had weighed and calculated all the advantages to be gained, and had even ascertained at what rate he could insure the lady's life, and had made himself certain that nothing in the deed of Lord Ongar's marriage settlement entailed any pecuniary penalty on his widow's second marriage. In other words, she doesn't lose anything if she takes a new husband. Although that seems odd. It seems like Ongar, just from what little we know of him, or certainly at the behest of Hugh Clavering, would have put in such a notice. Then he had gone down, as we know, to Ongar Park, and as he walked from the lodge to the house and back again, he had looked around him complacently, and told himself that the place would do very well. For the English character, in spite of the pig-headedness of many Englishmen, he had, as he would have said himself, much admiration, and he thought the life of a country gentleman with a nice place of his own, with such a very nice place of his own as was Ongar Park, and so very nice an income, would suit him well in his declining years. And he had certain advantages, certain aids towards his object, which had come to him from circumstances, or indeed as he had also certain disadvantages. He knew the lady, which was itself much. He knew much of the lady's history, and had that cognizance of the saddest circumstances of her life, which in itself creates an intimacy. It is not necessary now to go back to those scenes which had disfigured the last months of Lord Ongar's life, but the reader will understand that what had then occurred gave the Count a possible footing as a suitor. And the reader will also understand the disadvantages which had at that time already shown themselves in the lady's refusal to see the Count. We shouldn't be talking about advantages and disadvantages. Her answer is no. There are no advantages. It may be thought that Sophie's standing with Lady Ongar would be a great advantage to her brother, but I doubt whether the brother trusted either the honesty or the discretion of his sister. He doesn't like her either. He would have been willing to purchase such an assistance as she might give, not in Archie's pleasant way, with banknotes hidden under glove, but by acknowledgments for services to be turned into solid remuneration when the marriage should have taken place, had he not feared that Sophie might communicate the fact of such acknowledgment to the other lady, that she might just tell Julia, making her own bargain in doing so. He had calculated all this, and had come to the conclusion that he had better make no direct proposal to Sophie, and when Sophie made a direct proposal to him, pointing out to him in glowing language all the fine things which such a marriage would give him, he had hardly vouchsafed her a word of answer. "Very well," said Sophie to herself, "very well, then we both know what we are about." And she knows that he's not in the market for her help. She's perfectly willing to sell it to Archie Clavering. Sophie herself would have kept Lady Ongar from marrying anyone had she been able. Not even a brother's gratitude would be so serviceable to her as the generous kindness of a devoted friend. That she might be able to sell her services as to a lover, and also to keep Julia from marrying, was a lucky combination of circumstances which did not occur to her till Archie came to her with money in his glove. That complicated game she was now playing, and was aware that Harry Clavering was the great stumbling block in her way. I think she knows on some level that no matter who marries Julia Ongar, one of the first things they'll do once the marriage is over is put her out on the street. I think she knows that. Her own brother would do it. A woman even less clever than Sophie would have perceived that Lady Ongar was violently attached to Harry, and Sophie, when she did see it, thought that there was nothing left for her but to make her hay while the sun was yet shining. Then she heard the story of Florence Burton, and again she thought that fortune was on her side. She told the story of Florence Burton, with what result we know, and it was quite sharp, even enough to perceive afterwards that the tale had had its intended effect, even though her Julie had resolutely declined to speak either of Harry Clavering or of Florence Burton. She doesn't have any direct evidence that her tattletaling got through, but she can pretty much tell. Count Pateroff had again called in Bolton Street, and had again been refused admittance. It was plain to him to see by the servant's manner that it was intended that he should understand that he was not to be admitted. Under such circumstances, it was necessary that he must either abandon his pursuit, or that he must operate on Lady Ongar through some other feeling than her personal regard for himself. He might, perhaps, have trusted much to his own eloquence if he could have seen her, but how is a man to be eloquent in his wooing if he cannot see the lady whom he covets? There is indeed a penny post. Thank you, Tony. We're very grateful for your penny post, we know. But in these days of legal restraints, there is no other method of approaching an unwilling beauty. Forcible abduction is put an end to in regards to Great Britain and Ireland, so the Count had to resort to the post. Sorry. The making of the bed is a very elaborate thing. Here we go. His letter was very long, and shall not, therefore, be given to the reader. He began by telling Lady Ongar that she owed it to him, for the good services he had done her, to read what he might say, and to answer him. He then gave her various reasons why she should see him, pleading, among other things, in language which she could understand, though the words were purposely as ambiguous as they could be made, that he had possessed, and did possess, the power of doing her a grievous injury, and that he had abstained, and hoped that he might be able to abstain in the future. She knew that the words contained no threat, that taken literally they were the reverse of a threat, and amounted to a promise, but she understood also that all he had intended to imply. Long as his own letter was, he said nothing in it to his own suit, confining himself to a request that she should see him. But his letter he sent to her in enclosure longer than the letter itself, in which his wishes were clearly explained. This is new. He has something specific to threaten her with. It certainly involves Lord Ongar. What could it be? She has never been indiscreet that we know. There cannot be any incriminating letter in the Count's possession. It's bribery, though. It's blackmail. This enclosure purported to be an expression of Lord Ongar's wishes on many subjects as they had been communicated to Count Pateroff in the latter days of the Lord's life. But as the manuscript was altogether in the Count's writing, and did not even pretend to have been subjected to Lord Ongar's eye, it simply amounted to the Count's own story of their alleged conversations. There might have been no such conversations, or their tenor might have been very different from that which the Count represented, or the statements and opinions, if expressed at all by Lord Ongar, might have been expressed at times when no statement and opinion coming from him could be of any value, meaning in delirium in his final days, when he wasn't in his right mind. But as to these conversations, if they could not be verified as having come from Lord Ongar's mouth when he was in full possession of such faculties as he possessed, all that would have amounted to nothing with Lady Ongar. To Lord Ongar alive she had owed obedience, and had been obedient. To Lord Ongar dead she owed no obedience, and would not be obedient. Such would have been her feelings as to any document which could have reached her, purporting to contain Lord Ongar's wishes. But this document was of a nature which made her especially antagonistic to the exercise of any such marital authority from the grave. It was very long, and went into small details which were very small, but the upshot of it all was tendering of great thanks to Count Pateroff, and the expression of a strong wish that the Count should marry his widow. O said that this would be the only thing for J's name. O said that this would be the safest course for his own honor. O said that he took my hand, and that in promising to take this step I gave him great comfort. O commissioned me to speak to J in his name, to this effect. The O was, of course, Lord Ongar, and the J was, of course, Julia. Thanks, Tony. That's great. It was all in French, and went on in the same strain for many pages. Lady Ongar answered the letter as follows. Lady Ongar presents her compliments to Count Pateroff, and begs to return the enclosed manuscript, which is, to her, perfectly valueless. Lady Ongar must still decline, and now more strongly than before, to receive Count Pateroff. That's it. That's all she writes. It was quite firm. She was quite firm as she did this. She had no doubt at all on the matter. She did not feel that she wanted to ask for any advice, but she did feel that this Count might still work her additional woe, that her cup of sorrow might not yet even be full, and that she was sadly in want of love and protection. She made this bargain with her eyes wide open. She is alone in the world. Her relatives won't see her. Her former lover is extremely compromised, and there's no one else. For aught she knew, the Count might publish the whole statement, and people might believe that those words came from her husband, and that her husband had understood what would be best for her fame and for his honor. The whole thing was a threat, and not to save herself from any misery would she have succumbed to a menace, but still it was possible that the threat might be carried out. Again, I want to point out here, I know her letter is dated from the 1860s, so Julia is long gone, but I still want to point out, you have more money than God. Hire a lady's maid and a footman. Make the lady's maid refined, daughter of an earl, and make the footman enormous, someone who can crack heads like eggshells. You'd be amazed how many of the problems you're facing in this book would disappear if you did both those things, which would be, at most, £200 a year. Anyway, she was sorely in want of love and protection. At this time, when the Count's letter reached her, Harry had been with her, and we know what had passed between them. She had bid him go to Florence, and love Florence, and marry Florence, and leave her in her desolation. That had been her last command to him, but we all know what such commands mean. She had not been false in giving him these orders. She had intended it in the moment. The glow of self-sacrifice had been warm in her bosom, and she had resolved to do without that which was wanted in order to that another might have it. But when she thought of it afterwards in her loneliness, she told herself that Florence Burton could not want Harry's love as she wanted it. There could not be such need to this girl, who possessed father and mother and brothers and youth, as there was to her, who had no other arm on which she could lean, beside that of the one man for whom she acknowledged her love, and who had also declared his passion for her. She made no schemes to deprive Florence of her lover. In the long hours of her own solitude, she never revoked, even within her own bosom, the last word she had said to Harry Clavering. But not the less did she hope that he might come to her again, and that she might learn from him that he had freed himself from that unfortunate engagement in which her falseness had driven him. It was after she had answered Count Pateroff's letter that she resolved to go out of town for 3 or 4 days. For some short time she had been minded to go away altogether, and not to return till after the autumn, but this scheme gradually diminished itself and fell away, till she determined that she would come back after 3 or 4 days. Then came to her Sophie, her devoted Sophie. Sophie whom she despised and hated. Sophie of whom she was so anxious to rid herself that in all her plans there was some little underplot to that effect. Sophie whom she knew to be dishonest to her in any way that might make dishonesty profitable. And before Sophie had left her, Sophie had engaged herself to go with her dear friend to the Isle of Wight. Break the engagement. Hire a 10-foot-tall footman and tell her Sophie Gordeloup is not admitted. And that if she comes around again, he'll follow her around the corner of the building and break her leg. It's not Julia saying that, it's the footman saying that. He'll deny that he said it. Problem solved. As a matter of course, Sophie was to be franked on this expedition. On such expeditions, Sophie was always franked as a matter of course, and Sophie would travel with all imaginable luxury, a matter to which Sophie was by no means indifferent, though her own private life was conducted with an economy that was not luxurious. But, although all these good things came in Sophie's way, she contrived to make it appear that she was devoting herself in a manner that was almost sacrificial to the friend of her bosom. She's, in other words, being comped for everything. At the same time, Lady Ongar sent a few words, as a messenger, to the Count by his sister. Lady Ongar, having told Madame Gordeloup the story of the document which had reached her, and having described her own answer, was much commended by her friend. "You are quite right, dear, quite right. Of course I am fond of my brother. Edward and I have always been the best of friends, but that does not make me think you ought to give yourself to him. Bah! Why should a woman give away everything? Edward is a fine fellow, but what is that? Fine fellows like to have all the money themselves." "Will you tell him from me," said Lady Ongar, "that I will take it as a kindness on his part if he will abstain from coming to my house. I certainly shall not see him with my own consent." Sophie promised, and probably gave the message. But when she informed Edward of Lady Ongar's intended visit to the Isle of Wight, telling him the day on which they were going and the precise spot, with the name of the hotel at which they were to stay, she went a little beyond the commission which her dearest friend had given her. She's going to tell Count Pateroff exactly where to find Julia, totally undefended. At the western end of Isle of Wight, on the further shore, about 3 miles from the point of the island which we call the Needles, there is a little break in the cliff, known to all stay-at-home English travelers as Freshwater Gate. Here there is a cluster of cottages and 2 inns, and a few bathing boxes, and ready access by easy ascent to the breezy downs on either side, over which the sea air blows with all its salt and wholesome sweetness. Bathing boxes might need a little. There are no footnotes in this Dover edition, but if you've never read any Victorian literature, you might wonder what that is. They are wheeled boxes. Basically, think of a little cabana, a beachside or poolside cabana, a bench, some towels, flotation device, a place for a change of clothes, basically in private. In Victorian times, you used to put one of those on wheels and wheel it out into the water, because the ladies weren't going to walk out into the water in their bloomers. They weren't going to walk out in their primitive swimwear. They would go into these things privately. At one of these 2 inns, Lady Ongar located herself and Sophie, and all Freshwater and all Yarmouth and all that end of the island were alive to the fact that a rich widowed countess, respecting whom such strange tales were told, had come on a visit to these parts. Innkeepers like such visitors. The more venomous are the stories told against them, the more money they are apt to spend, and the less likely they are to examine their bills. A rich woman altogether without a character is a mine of wealth to an innkeeper. In the present case, no such godsend had come the way, but there was supposed to be something a little odd, and the visitor was on that account more welcome. Sophie was not the most delightful companion in the world for such a place. London was her sphere, and as she herself had understood when disclaiming against those husbands who keep their wives in the country. And she had no love for the sea specially, regarding all winds as nuisances excepting those that had been raised by her own efforts, and thinking that salt from the salt cellar was more convenient than that brought to her on the breezes. It was now near the end of May, but she had not been half an hour at the inn before she was loud in demanding a fire, and when the fire came she was unwilling to leave it. Her gesture was magnificent when Lady Ongar proposed to her that she should bathe. What? Put her own dear little dry body, by her own will, into the cold sea? She shrugged herself and shook herself, and without speaking a word declined with so much eloquence that it was impossible not to admire her. Nor would she walk. On the first day, during the warmest part of the day, she allowed herself to be taken out in a carriage belonging to the inn, but after her drive she clung to the fire and consumed her time with a French novel. Nor was Lady Ongar much more comfortable in the Isle of Wight than she had been in London. The old poet told us how black care sits behind the horseman, and some modern poet will some day describe to us that terrible goddess as she shakes her place with the stoker close to the fire of a locomotive engine. Sitting with Sophie opposite to her, Lady Ongar was not happy, even though her eye rested on the lines of that magnificent coast. Once, indeed, on the evening of their first day, Sophie left her, and she was alone for nearly an hour. Ah, how happy she could have been if Harry Clavering might have been there with her. Perhaps a day might come in which Harry might bring her there. In such a case, Atra Cura would be left behind, and then she might be altogether happy. She sat dreaming of this for above an hour, and Sophie was still away. When Sophie returned, which she did all too soon, she explained that she had been in her bedroom. She had been very busy, and had now come down to make herself comfortable. Wonder what she's busy doing. On that next evening, Lady Ongar declared her intention of going up on the downs by herself. They had dined at 5, so she might have a long evening, and soon after 6 she started. "If I do not break down, I will get as far as the Needles," she said. Sophie, who had heard that distance was 3 miles, lifted her hands in despair. "If you are not back before 9, I shall send some people after you." Consenting to this with a laugh, Lady Ongar made her way up to the downs and walked steadily on towards the extreme point of the island. To the Needles themselves she did not make her way. These rocks are now approached, as all the stay-at-home travellers know, through a fort, and down to the fort she did not go. But turning a little from the highest point of the hill towards the cliffs on her left hand, she descended till she reached the spot which she could look down on the pebbly beach lying some 300 feet below her, and on the soft, shining ripple of the quiet waters as they moved themselves with the pleasant sound of the long strand which lay stretched in a line from the spot beneath her out to the point of the island. The evening was warm and almost transparent in its clearness, and very quiet. There was no sound even of the breeze. When she seated herself close upon the margin of the cliff, she heard the small waves moving the stones which they washed, and the sound was of a little children's voices, very distant. Looking down, she could see through the wonderful transparency of the water, and the pebbles below it were bright with diamonds, and the sands were burnished like gold. And each tiny, silent wavelet, as it moved up towards the shore and lost itself in the last of its effort, stretched itself the whole length of the strand. Such brightness on the seashore she had never seen before, nor had she ever listened as now she listened to that infantine babble of the baby waves. She sat there close upon the margin, and on a seat of chalk which the winds had made, looking, listening, and forgetting for a while that she was Lady Ongar, whom people did not know, who lived alone in the world with Sophie Gordeloup for her friend, and whose lover was betrothed to another woman. For a minute, in all this beauty, she can forget all that. She had been there perhaps half an hour, and had learned to be at home on her perch, sitting there in comfort, with no desire to move, when a voice which she well knew at first sound startled her, and she rose quickly to her feet. "Lady Ongar," said the voice, "are you not rather near the edge?" As she turned round, there was Count Pateroff, with his hand already upon her dress, so that no danger might be produced by the suddenness of his speech. "There is nothing to fear," she said, stepping back from her seat. As she did so, he dropped his hand from her dress, and, raising it to his head, lifted his hat from his forehead. "You will excuse me, I hope, Lady Ongar," he said, "for having taken this mode of speaking to you." "I certainly shall not excuse you. Not further than I can help it shall I listen to you. There are few words which I must say. Count Pateroff, I beg that you will leave me. This is treacherous and unmanly, and can do you no good. By what right do you follow me here?" "I follow you for your own good, Lady Ongar. I do it that you may hear me say a few words which are necessary for you to hear." "I will hear no words from you. That is, none willingly. By this time you ought to know me and understand me." She began to walk up the hill very rapidly, and for a moment or two she had thought that he had thought that she would escape him. But her breath had soon failed her, and she found herself compelled to stand while he regained his place beside her. This he had not done without an effort, and for some minutes they were both silent. "It is very beautiful," at last he said, pointing his way over the sea. "Yes, it is very beautiful," she answered. "Why did you disturb me when I was so happy?" But the Count was still recovering his breath, and made no answer to this question. When, however, she attempted to move on again, still breasting the hill, he put his hand upon her very arm gently. "Lady Ongar," he said, "you must listen to me for a moment. Why do you do it without a quarrel? Why not do it without a quarrel? If you mean that I cannot escape from you, it is true enough. Why should you want to escape? Did I ever hurt you? Before this have I not protected you from injury? No, never. You protect me? Yes, I, from your husband, from yourself, and from the world. You do not know, not yet all that I have done for you. Did you read what Lord Ongar had said?" "I read what it pleased you to write." Would it please me? Do you pretend to think that Lord Ongar did not speak his words there? Do you not know that those were his own words? Do you not recognize them? Ah, yes, Lady Ongar, you know them to be true. Their truth or falsehood is nothing to me. They are altogether indifferent to me either way. That would be very well if it were possible, but it is not. There, now we are at the top, and it will be easier. Will you let me have the honor to offer you my arm? No? Be it so, but I think you would walk easier. It would not be for the first time. That is a falsehood. And as she spoke, stepped before him and looked into his face with eyes full of passion. That is a positive falsehood. I never walked with a hand resting on your arm. There came over his face the pleasantest smile as he answered her. "You forget everything," he said, "everything. But it does not matter. Other people will not forget. Julie, you had better take me for your husband. You will be better as my wife, and happier than you can be otherwise." "Look down there, Count Pateroff, down to the edge. If my misery is too great to be borne, I can escape from it on better terms than those you propose to me." "Ah, that is what we call poetry. Poetry is very pretty, and in saying this you make yourself divine. But to be dashed over the cliffs and broken on the rocks, in prose it is not so well. Sir, you will allow me to pass on while you remain, or will you let me rest here while you return alone?" "No, Julie, not so. I have found you with too much difficulty. In London, you see, I could not find you. Here, for a minute, you must listen to me. Do you not know, Julie, that your character is in my hands?" "In your hands? No, never. Thank God, never. But what if it were?" "Only this, that I am forced to play the only game you leave open to me. Chance brought you and me together in such a way that nothing but marriage can be beneficial to either of us. And I swore to Lord Ongar that it should be so. I mean that it shall be so, or that you shall be punished for your misconduct to him and to me. You are both insolent and false. But listen to me. You are here, and I cannot avoid you. I know what your threats mean." "I have never threatened you. I have promised you my aid, but have used no threats." "Not when you tell me that I should be punished. But to avoid no punishment, if any be in your power, will I ever willingly place myself in your company. You may write to me what papers you please, and repeat whatever stories you may choose to fabricate, but you will not frighten me into compliance by doing so. I have, at any rate, spirit enough to resist such attempts as that." "As you are living at present, you are alone in the world?" "And I am content to remain so." "You are thinking, then, of no second marriage?" "If I were, does it concern you? But I will speak no further words to you. If you follow me into the inn, or persecute me further by forcing yourself upon me, I shall put myself under the protection of the police." Having said this, she walked on as quickly as her strength would permit, while he walked by her side, urging upon her his old arguments as to Lord Ongar's expressed wishes, as to his own efforts on her behalf, and at last to the strong affection with which he regarded her. But she kept on her promise, and said not a word in answer to it all. For more than an hour they walked side by side, and during the greater part of that time not a syllable escaped her. From moment to moment she kept her eye warily on him, fearing that he might take her by the arm or attempt some violence with her. But he was too wise for this, and too fully conscious that no such proceeding on his part could be of any service to him. He continued, however, to speak to her words which she could not avoid hearing, hoping rather than thinking that he might at last frighten her by the description of all the evil which it was within his power to do to her. But in acting thus, he showed that he knew nothing of her character. She was not a woman whom any prospect of evil could possibly frighten into a distasteful marriage. Any more. She was, once upon a time, that kind of a woman. Not anymore. Within a few hundred yards of the hotel is another fort, and at this point the path taken by Lady Ongar led into the private grounds of the inn in which she was staying. Here the Count left her, raising his hat as he did so, and saying that he hoped to see her again before she left the island. "If you do so," she said, "it shall be in the presence of those that can protect me." And so they parted. So the Count finally got his way. He finally got to talk to Julia. And it's pretty clear what the substance of that talk is. It's pretty clear. We didn't hear that hour of talk, but it's pretty clear that the damage he intends to do to her is to publish the account that he sent her, the long document that he sent her, which she's quite right. The world would believe it. The world wouldn't stop to notice that it's not verified in any way. They would believe it. I guess maybe she's thinking no further harm can really be done to someone who's already an outcast with no friends. I don't know that that's entirely true. The document would probably at least give the Courtin people sufficient legal grounds to further challenge her settlement, turn her out in her petticoats. But that the Count finally succeeded in talking to her. So we're going to move on from here next time, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.